Good afternoon. My name is Bethany Maddox, and I'm a member of the customer care team here at Vitech Corporation. I'm very pleased to be your host for this webinar today as we welcome Laurie Wiggins, presenting Risky Business, How They Really Do It, Results of Sysenex Incorporated Risk Management Market Survey. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to review a few technical details. First, questions. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function in the GoToWebinar window. We will be monitoring these throughout today's event. We plan to respond to questions at the end of the webinar, so please send them in. Finally, the webinar is being recorded today. An online archive with this presentation will be available within 24 hours of the live version. I believe that takes care of all the housekeeping, so let's get started. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenter today. Laurie Wiggins is an engineer and an entrepreneur. She has 25 years of experience in engineering, program management, and business development. Laurie is currently the president and founder of Sysenex Incorporated, a systems engineering services company. Sysenex is currently engaged in the development of a risk identification tool, Program Risk MD. Please join me in welcoming Laurie Wiggins.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Just a little bit about me. I spent 19 years with the Boeing company as a systems engineer and then went out on my own. I have broad experience mostly in the aerospace area with IT development also. For the last 6 years, I have been consulting in a variety of ways. I help people as far as systems engineering goes on their programs, and I also do proposal development. My company, as previously mentioned, is developing a risk identification capability. And because of that, we decided to do a survey, a market survey in the aerospace industry to see how people really used risk management, whether they did it or not, and if they did it, how did they do it. This survey was conducted during November and December of last year, so it's pretty recent. We polled people and organizations working in the aerospace defense domain primarily because that's what me and my colleagues have most of our experience in, and we're most familiar with it. It turns out that some of our respondents also work in other domains, thus the predominance of aerospace defense rather than it being only aerospace and defense. We were able to poll 37 small and large companies. And here's how they come out as far as number of personnel. Anecdotally, we recognize that risk management behavior varied between small and large companies. And we were particularly interested in the small companies. But it turned out that with our survey, we got representative sampling across various size companies, which we felt added value to our survey results. So you can see that predominantly we ended up with small companies. 53% of the respondents came from small companies. 23% were from companies that had more than 5,000 people. So these would be major companies that you would probably be very familiar with. And then in the middle here, those companies from small to medium size, that is larger than 50 folks and then less than 5,000, we were also able to get some response from there as well. We had 24 survey questions. We felt like if we could have asked many, many more questions, and we are curious about many, many more things, but we had to make sure that The survey was able to be completed in a reasonable period of time, about 15 minutes. Beyond that, you're going to really try people's patience. They're going to give up and walk away because everybody's busy. We know that 200 people got the survey because we know we emailed 200 people, but our friends were trying to be helpful, and so they forwarded it on to others, which is just fine. So we think the top end is about 300 that got it initially. We know it didn't go viral on the internet, however. It turns out that we got a great response. Out of the 200 to 300 that got it, 49 people took the survey, which is really quite phenomenal as far as survey responses go. We did rather tilt the results in our favor because we followed up with phone calls to a lot of these folks because we knew them or we knew people who knew them. So the follow-up was quite time-consuming, but it helped us a lot. Okay, so who took this survey? Pretty much even split between executives and managers and the folks that are in the trenches doing this work. Keep in mind that some of these quote-unquote executives and managers, especially with small companies, are also those people doing the work. So, you know, it could be that these figures are probably more like 50-50. We were also very heartened to see that 2/3 of the respondents have more than 20 years of work experience, and 1/5 of them have 30 or more years of work experience. Experience is very important in all areas, but it seems like it is particularly and critically important in the risk management area. You have to get some years of work experience under your belt before you can really appreciate what risk management does and what it doesn't do. And the fact that we had such senior people responding to the survey felt like it added a great deal of value because these guys have been around the block and they know what works and what doesn't. So as we get into the actual results of the survey, just be aware that even though we had 49 people taking this thing, not everybody responded to every question. It's fair to say that most people answered most questions, but the percentage of responses that you see for a question is based on the number of people that answered that particular question, FYI. So it turns out that over 3/4 of organizations surveyed, they do have a risk management process in place. However, interestingly, almost 1/3 of companies with less than or equal to 50 employees have no risk management system. Now, I would caveat this in part by saying that there's a couple of companies in there that have one person in them. However, that does not account for almost 1/3 of them not having a risk management process. So if you are in a small company and you don't have a risk management process, I would just urge you to look at that. And the fact that risk management is a standard industry process, that it can help identify early things that can hurt your program, and also that small companies are more at risk, if you will, because of their reliance on fewer programs for revenues. If something happens to one of those programs, then that carries a lot more financial peril for a small company than it does a large company. So something to think about. So when we asked why most people have a risk management process in place, it turns out because they have to. The customer says, in almost 90% of the cases, yeah, you got to have it, or in 2/3 of the cases, there are existing regulations which demand it. It turns out that when risk management processes are present, in over 4/5 of the cases, that folks use them. And that of the organizations that have risk management processes, that not only do they use the process, but they use the data. And that's good. So the messages here are, if it's there, they'll use it. But in most cases, it's not clear whether they would have a risk management process if it was not mandatory for them to have it. Interestingly, over half of the respondents to the survey reported that they have been on a program, either their current one or one in the past, that has had a risk-related loss or project failure. And we're going to informally poll the audience to see what their experience in this area is.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm putting the poll up now. For all of our attendees, you'll see a poll on screen. Just go ahead and click on the answer that best applies to you. Our question is, have you ever been on a program, project, or activity that experienced a risk-related loss or program, project, or activity failure? You can answer yes, yes, and you had cost or schedule consequences. Yes, and you had cost and schedule consequences, or no, you have not been on a project that experienced this. I'll give everybody about 10 more seconds and then we'll show our results. So if you haven't weighed in yet, please take a minute to do so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get this closed. It looks like the responses have stopped coming in. Let's put our results on screen and let everybody see what our results are. Laurie, it looks like about 20% of people said yes, they've experienced this. 40% said yes with cost or schedule consequences. 30% said yes with cost and schedule consequences, and 10% said no.
Well, that's very interesting. So a lot of you understand what I'm talking about here, and thank you for your feedback. We're going to move on now.
Okay, Laurie, I'm going to hand the screen back over to you.
Thank you.
All right, it's yours, Laurie. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, continuing on then with the results of the survey. Interestingly, as far as the risk professionals go, more of them use the process than the results. I really have no explanation for this. If we do another market survey, I'd certainly like to dig into this area. Speaking of doing another market survey, if we ever did that, I would like to also dig into further the failures area and ask more questions about that of folks. So, of those that have a risk management process in place, when do they use it during the life cycle? Well, it turns out that over 9 out of 10 use it during the requirement stage early on, but then it really drops off, so that by the time you get to operations, only about 2/3 use the risk management process. And it also turns out that about 2/3 of the respondents use risk management during the full life cycle. So if you're a company and you have a risk management process in place, then a third of those companies are not getting the maximum value of their investment because they're not using the risk management process throughout the life cycle. So that's something to think about if you are in that position. So what kind of tools do people use to do risk management? I found this very interesting. Almost 60% of people use more than one tool. And 17% of them use both in-house and client tools. So some of them are required to use their client tool, but then they have in-house tools as well. Moving on. So, who is responsible for performing risk management on programs? 61% say, about 6 out of 10, say that it is everyone's job. And then there's overlap with that answer and the next one, which is, okay, 47% of people indicate that it's one person's or one group's responsibility. So it's interesting that that's the case, because that means that 39% thinks that it may not be their job to do that. Something to think about again if you're on a program where you haven't been told it's your job. So how often are risks reviewed by program management? 7 out of 10 is weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and certainly as far as our experience goes, our program experience, that's what we've seen the most frequently. 21% say it depends on the situation, so they don't always do it in every situation. We thought that this question could potentially be dependent on the size of the company that you're in, recalling that almost a third of companies with 50 folks or less, they don't have a risk management process in place. But it turns out that this response is independent of company size, which I thought was interesting. What methods are used to perform risk identification? So I have to say at this juncture that there's a bit of toggling back and forth between risk management and risk identification. And risk identification is the first step in risk management. So a typical risk management process includes identification of a risk, quantifying that risk, identifying the burn down steps or solution steps to that risk, tracking that risk, and repeat the process as often as required or as necessary. We wanted to dig into the risk identification because of in-house work that we're doing. Interestingly, and frankly not surprisingly, a lot of people rely on their own experience, the lessons that they've learned in the past. So over 8 out of 10 rely on that. And the time and tested method of talking to your colleagues and any subject matter experts, that's SME there, to see what their thoughts are, brainstorming, failure analysis, and all the rest. PRA is probable risk assessment. It's clear that folks really want to get their arms around risks, because almost 70% of them use 3 or more methods to identify risk, and over 40% of them use 5 or more methods. So they're keen to do this. And also, once they have identified them, then how do you manage the risks? Well, it turns out that everyone goes out for a pass on this. Out of the 29 respondents that answered this question, I mean, we had an average of 2 tools or capabilities per respondent. So you can see that there's a whole a plethora of tools that are being used. They're either commercially available, they're homegrown, or developed by a third party. When we originally asked this question, we asked about, okay, did you go outside and use something that you purchased outside, or did you develop something in-house? And it turns out that the line gets blurry because a number of them used Excel, which is a commercially available tool, but then they either customized it or did other things to it and considered it a homegrown or in-house tool. However, we were quite interested to see that there is no tool that dominates in this area. Excel was cited as the most common tool to manage risks, but at 12%, it's certainly not dominating the market. You can see some other well-known tools here, including ARM at 10% and at-risk at 5%, but again, nothing really dominates here. I would also add that our company performed a risk tool market survey last year around this time in conjunction with George Washington University. And we identified over 50 different risk tools on the market at that time. And it was clear that there were many different capabilities out there, and really we could not detect any of them dominating the market. So this is further proof of that. So as large a variety of commercial tools that we detected, that was nothing in comparison to the to the homegrown tools that we detected that people indicated that they used. There's just a whole an incredible variety of items, including dashboards, spreadsheets, databases, processes, assessments, plans. Obviously, this question was very broadly interpreted, and any additional market surveys that we might do in the future will be sure to narrow this down so that we have more specificity in the answer. But the message is clear. There's a lot of different capabilities people are using. So, of all tools, the most common type of tool is spreadsheet, whether that's Excel or something else. Although used for risk management, most folks said it doesn't really work for them as far as risk identification. However, given all this variety, 60% of folks indicated that based on an assessment with respect to comprehensiveness, scalability, ease of use, and accuracy, and we did have them evaluate their tools from poor, fair, adequate, good, and excellent, that they felt that they were at least adequate for risk identification. If you didn't like your tool, what is it that you really want to see as far as additional features? What is it that you really want? What is the biggest problem that you see with what you're currently using? Almost half cited a consistency issue, that they felt that they just didn't have a consistent approach to risk identification. And also, over 40% indicated their approach was not comprehensive. And sometimes it was hard to sort out what risks are the most important. So, if you are looking for additional risk identification capabilities, if you dream about this for a minute, what do you really want? Well, if you'll recall, a previous response indicated that over 80% of folks use lessons learned to identify risks. And here we are. The echo of that is here, in that an additional capability they'd like to see is to be able to refer to risks from previous programs to see if they've encountered the same thing or something similar again. Also, there is a desire for a comprehensive list of identified risks. as well as some additional help that they apparently don't have in the risk management area. And a question that we asked them about being willing to assist in the development of a new approach for a risk identification. And of course, we had a very good reason for asking this, and a self-serving one, since we are developing this new approach to risk identification. And sight unseen, interestingly, 70% said that they'd be willing to assist with concept and design, and a third would be willing to test such a tool. So I found that quite remarkable, and potentially indicative of a latent desire to not only be involved in a new development effort, but a sincere desire to want to see improvement in this area. So just going through some conclusions here. Based on what we know as far as our experience with risk management goes, it's clear that a lot of people have risk management processes in place because they have to, and yet through experience, and also the systems engineering literature is very clear about this, that early and continuous identification of risks saves money, time, and heartaches. That is just very clear from the literature. And we also know that risks can occur throughout a program, and yet we see that a third of respondents don't use risk management throughout their program life cycle. Although the more people that are held responsible for risk management, the more likely you are to spot all the risks that you have. 39% don't consider it to be everybody's job to do that. And as far as failures go, even though many people have experienced failures and risk-related problems, they're not bigger proponents of risk management. So the question would be, why isn't risk management standard everywhere? And if you would, kindly participate in this quick poll question. Do we have a quick poll question?
Yes, Laurie, I do have that for you. I'm sorry, I had trouble getting myself unmuted there.
No problem.
Okay, here we go on our next poll. Our next question is, does your current program, project, or activity have a requirements management program, and do you use it? So everyone in our audience, if you'll take just a minute, we're going to ask you one last question before we let you ask questions to Laurie. So while you're answering this, I'll go ahead and take a minute and say that if you have a question for Laurie, please do send it in. There is a questions chat feature in the GoToWebinar window you can use to send those questions to me, and I'll make sure that we answer just as many as we can today. All right, Laurie, it looks like our answers are in. Let's share our results. It looks like 56% said yes to both. 22% said yes, they have a requirements program, but no, they don't use it. And 22% say no, they don't have a program and therefore don't use it. Is that what you were, anything like what you were expecting to get, Laurie? Or was it consistent with what you saw in your surveys?
I think it's roughly consistent, so that's very interesting, and I appreciate everyone who participated. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Laurie, I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen back over to you. It's yours.
Thank you so much. And that concludes my presentation. And if you have any follow-on questions, please ask them now.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Let's go ahead and move on to those questions. We do have a few in already. Thank you to everybody who submitted them. I encourage everyone to join the discussion and submit questions at any time using the questions and chat feature in the GoToWebinar window. Let's get started, Lori. Our first question is from Alexis, and she wants to know why don't more people use risk management processes?
I've talked to a lot of people about this, and my colleagues have too. Unlike on the business side in the business world, risk management, although there is a standard process for doing that, how that process is carried out is as much art as science. And folks find risk identification daunting. As you saw, many folks have multiple ways of trying to get their arms around their risks. And if you cannot properly identify a risk, you're not going to be able to resolve it. You can't identify the steps to solve it. You can't burn it down. You can't track it. So I think that because what this boils down to is there is not a good standardized approach for how to perform risk management on the technical side, that a lot of people just have difficulty doing it.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. Our next question is from Jean. And Jean wants to know, is use of the risk management process more important during one part of a program versus another part?
Well, that's a really good question. From the literature, we see that the nature of risks changes throughout the program. When you're in the concept stage, the risks that you identify are going to be different than those that are identified in, say, the detailed design or test phase. So you get the maximum benefit from or return on investment when you do utilize risk management throughout the program for that reason.
Okay, our next question is from Jim, and he wants to know a little bit about your approach for risk management there at Sysenex.
We are currently about to go into pilot testing with Program Risk MD, and we've been using Program Risk MD informally for quite some time. Based on over 30 years of program experience and about 10 years in development, Program Risk MD identifies over 200 different risks with 5 risk levels identified for each risk. Users work their way through these risks, which are divided into 6 different buckets, including technical, managerial, operational, organizational, and so forth, in order to apply a very comprehensive approach to risk identification. And once then the risks are identified and how big a problem you have, then you can use this information to account for both likelihood and probability of the risk occurring, and if it does, how serious is it on your program. So that's Program Risk MD in a nutshell. If there is interest in testing this capability, please contact me. We do have several companies who will be piloting this capability, but we are looking for more folks in order to achieve some feedback. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, everyone, Laurie's contact information is on the screen right now. If you miss that information, you can always contact Vitech. We'll be sure to get you connected. Well, that last question was from Jim O. We have two Jims on our webinar today, and Jim D has a question for you. And he asks if you asked during your survey if people are using both qualitative and quantitative risk assessments.
We did not ask that specific question. I'd be curious as to what prompts this question.
Okay, well, why don't we see if we can take that conversation onto our website, because that's our last question for the day. So, Jim, if you want to respond to Laurie on that, you can go to community.vitechcorp.com. I encourage everyone there to go and kind of continue this conversation. I'll be sure to have someone here at Vitech post a forum thread to have this conversation in. So, Jim, I invite you to come, and Laurie, if you can contribute to that as well.
Sure.
I hope everyone will join us for the rest of our webinar series, which does continue through June. If you'd like details or to register, you can go to our website, and that's vitechcorp.com. In closing, I'd like to thank you, Laurie. I'd especially like to thank all of our attendees today. As this webinar comes to a close, a survey will open on your screen, either in a new tab or in a new window. Please take a moment to provide us with feedback on today's presentation and what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.